Why so serious? You want to know how I got these scars? Let's put a smile on that face.
Hey everyone, so as you can see today I am showing you how to achieve the Heath Ledger Joker look. I couldn't find the ideal wig, so I'm starting with a ball cap. This is a vinyl ball cap and I got it from the makeup Armoury. As you can see, this is a flesh coloured ball cap. It's pre-coloured and it's so thin that you can blend it away to nothing. And to apply the ball cap, I'm going to be using this Pros-Aide cream, and it's also from the makeup Armoury. A ball cap might seem a little daunting if you've never applied one before, but it's actually quite easy. I have a tutorial on how to apply a vinyl ball cap. Makes it so much easier to understand, so if you want to know how to do that, I will link it on screen for you now. So I got this hideous wig off of eBay, and as you can see, it really is awful. I always like things to try and look as authentic as possible, so I decided I would take the wig apart and use sections of it to create hair that looks more like Heath Ledger's. I'm not too concerned that the colouring's not quite right. Once green goes over this, it's going to look a little bit more ashy, which will give it more of a brown appearance. But if you can find a really good wig, then you can skip this section and go straight to the makeup. So the first section of the wig I cut off has 3 layers of hair to it. And using some Pros-Aide cream, I'm applying this from ear to ear. This is going to be the strip of glue that's going to adhere the first section of hair to the back of the head. If you want longevity with this, then you can apply cream to the whole area that the hair is going to be sticking to. We're taking this off after the tutorial, so to make life easier, I'm just applying the glue in strips. I've applied this so that the hair sits just below the ears where Heath Ledger's hair sits when he plays the Joker. The wig that I bought was just too full on, it had too much hair to it, so this is a really cool way to do a DIY job of the hair. I made sure the wig that I bought had a wave to it as well, so it wasn't dead straight. Notice how I'm not taking the strips too far forward because I plan to give Jack a new hairline to mimic that of Heath Ledger's as the Joker, and in order to make it look real, like it's actually growing out of Jack's head, I'm going to individually stick a lot of the hair at the front. So we don't want those strips coming too far forward, otherwise it's going to give the game away and you also won't have room to apply those individual strands. So I've used a light coloured pencil to map out the hairline at the front to match that of Heath Ledger's, and now I'm filling in the top of the ball cap with some full coverage concealer, and this is just going to add a little bit of a skin tone. It doesn't need to match Jack's as we're going to be putting white on his face anyway. The purpose of this concealer will hide the colour of Jack's hair underneath the bald cap, so when we apply the fake hair in the individual strands, it will look like it's coming straight out of the scalp rather than being able to see his hair as a shadow underneath. Looking at Heath Ledger's hair, one side is slightly higher than the other. It is partly also the fact that his hair is on that side, but to make sure that we don't miss it, I'm going to colour one side higher than the other. So this is just to show you how thick the wig is and that it just doesn't have a lace front to it, so it just would never look realistic. So underneath that wig cap, I'm taking strips of the hair off and applying it in strips over the top of Jack's head. And now we're getting towards the front of the hair. I want to start applying the hair in more individual strands so it looks realistic. So I'm placing down a lot more of the cream Pros-Aide and allowing it just to go off and go a bit tacky so I can start placing the hair on. For a little while it's going to look a little bit crazy because we are going to have to cut the hair into shape, but for now this is the process. Now you can see that it's really starting to come together and it looks like from the front that it's a really good natural hairline. Again, for a £9 wig you can't expect too much, so the colour is going to be slightly off, but that's okay because we're going to work over this with some paint anyway and some cream just to change the colour of it. However, if you can get a cheap wig with the right colours, then you're already off to a better start. I cut individual strands and in small bunches I'm pressing them onto the Pros-Aide just to make them look as though they are coming directly out of the scalp. I would usually use this dauber when using lace front wigs, but I'm just using it to tap over the Pros-Aide to help mattify it. The tiny fibres come off into the glue and it just gives it a bit more of a natural finish rather than a shiny one. For precision, I'm just using some nail scissors to trim the very ends of the hair off around the front of the face to make it look a bit shorter. Jack did insist that I use my hair scissors for this, but I was on a roll with the nail scissors, so I just carried on. And to be fair, not all of you are going to have hair scissors at home, are you? Whereas most people do have nail scissors. So as you can see, I am continuing to take out some of the bulk and just make some of those curly strands a little bit shorter. So to colour the root of the hair, I am taking a brown cream. I've chose this over using a coloured hairspray or paint because I don't want it to look crispy. Although it is a cream based product, sometimes the hairs can clump together, but if you use a very fine kind of duo fibre brush, it just coats the hairs and they still look soft and natural, they don't look crispy. We are going to apply paint to the hair at the ends, and that's going to give us that kind of wet look, but the root we want it to stay quite soft, so that's why I've chosen to use a cream base, and as you can see it's getting a really good colour to the base, which is kind of like a mousy brown shade. Again, if you can get the ideal coloured wig then great, if not, this is just a really cool DIY method. To give the hair more of a wet look and kind of refine the waves and just keep it all in place, I'm going to use the L'Oreal Fix Design Gel Spray. I don't want to ruin the hair at this stage because we've come quite far with it, so my method was to spray a small amount as I go, and I'm using the tips of my fingers to work each section so that it looks a bit damp and a bit dishevelled. So I'm basing the hair and makeup on the scene where the Joker's been interrogated and he's been roughed up by Batman, so he looks less than pristine. You can see the makeup looks really worn, you can see his skin coming through, unlike at the beginning of the movie where he's mostly got quite a clown white face. So the aim of this tutorial is for that less than perfect look. You can see now I'm spraying the hair that it looks less voluminous and it looks as though it's kind of damp and worn in. For the green element to the hair, I'm using a green face paint, and the shade I am using is Grass Green 042 and it's by Superstar Paints. I'm making sure that I coat the very ends, and then using the brush I'm working this up the mid-length of the hair. It's important not to cover all of the hair with the green because it will look unrealistic. You just want to pick up certain strands and make sure that you can really see that there's that green tone to the hair, but there are still some strands that don't have any paint on. And I would advise that you use a glove when using this paint. I didn't realise until I washed it off that it actually left a stain on my fingers. So the rest of the tutorial I have kind of orange fingers. So moving on to the skin, I'm using some witch hazel, which Jack absolutely loves the smell of, and I'm using this to take off any oils of the skin before I apply the prosthetic pieces for the mouth. These are gelatin prosthetic pieces. If you Google gelatin prosthetic Joker pieces, you will see there are so many places that sell them. The first one I'm taking is the lower lip, and I'm applying some Pros-Aide to the back of the piece. I've also applied a very small amount to Jack's skin, and now I'm going to press that firmly into place. If you're not very confident with the placement of your prosthetic pieces, you can offer them up prior to gluing and then dust around them with some translucent powder so that you can see where the piece needs to go when you then apply the glue. Feel free to check out some of my previous prosthetic tutorials to see how this is done. These are quite small pieces, so I'm fairly confident in the placement of them, so I'm just going straight for it. I always tend to leave the flashing of the product, which is the very outer edges where they're the thinnest. I leave them till last because I don't want them to fold in on themselves, because once they're glued in place it's quite difficult to then manoeuvre them. So that's why I'm now going around with a cotton bud and a small amount of Pros-Aide on it, and I'm sticking down the seams. If you do get an edge that sticks to itself, you can take a small amount of alcohol, which is IPA, isopropanol alcohol, and a tiny thin brush to re-lift the edges. The alcohol will reactivate the glue and it will enable you to move it but also stick it back down. As I mentioned earlier, the pieces I'm using are made from gelatin, and the way to blend a gelatin edge is to use witch hazel. So I'm using that on a cotton bud and I'm rolling the very seams of the pieces away from the centre of the piece, and this is going to take away the edge with it, thinning it out so it lays flat against the skin. While pre-made gelatin pieces are great and convenient, you will find sometimes the flashing isn't very thin on all of the edges, and sometimes that does mean that you'll get a slightly thicker edge, which just means when you paint that you can see where the prosthetic sits. I did experience this with one side of the mouth pieces, but it is something that we can disguise with paintwork. You want to make sure that when you apply the Joker smile that the pieces are angled towards the middle of the ear, and also make sure that they align with the corner of the mouth. You can see the difference between the piece that we've applied to the chin and this piece and how well blended the chin looks. So it's worth taking your time when you're applying your pieces to make sure each one is completely stuck down and you've got glue on all of your edges so they look as seamless as possible before you started blending. And then just take that extra time to blend away all that flashing and visible edges. Also make sure that when you're lining up the corners of the mouth that you've got it as accurate as possible so that you don't get any lifting when the actor's speaking or when you're wearing it yourself. When you're applying the Pros-Aide around the mouth area, just give the glue a couple of minutes to go off so that it goes slightly tacky and see-through, so then when you place it down, get a really nice tight seal. And again, take your time when blending away the flashing around the mouth so that it looks as authentic as possible. I'm going to paint over these pieces with the Too Faced Born This Way concealer, which is the same product we use around the hairline. And the reason I'm doing this first is, as I said earlier, we are going for that dishevelled look to the skin, and we want the skin to show through in certain areas of the face. So I'm not entirely sure how much of the mouth will be visible. So for me, the best way to do this is to buff this over the skin and the prosthetic piece first, before we then go in with the face paint. I'm only using a very small amount of this, and I'm really buffing it into the skin and the prosthetics with a small brush, so we get the coverage but it's not cakey. Next I'm going into my Skin Illustrator palette, and I'm mixing together the rose and coral adjuster colours, and I'm going to place this into the inside of the slash marks around the smile. I'm using alcohol activated paints. You can use this for the whole process if you want it to be really durable. I've chosen these because I like that they just apply a wash of colour, so you can make them as sheer or as opaque as you like. For the white base, I'm going to use a cream product. You can use face paint, it's completely up to you. Where the cream doesn't set, it kind of wears better throughout the day as it warms up with your skin. It also doesn't have a matte finish to it, so for me it's just the ideal product for this look. Now the paint's obviously worn off of the Joker's face with his movements and his expressions, so to get that look I'm getting Jack to scrunch up his face, and then I'm using a fluffy blending brush to buff over the new contours of the face. That way the cream product won't sit in all of the little crevices, so you can see it already creates a worn in look. So for the forehead, I'm getting him to raise his eyebrows, and again I'm using the same technique with the brush. Another reason I'm using a smaller brush is because I can be more precise. Again, we don't want to cover the entire face. Don't forget to always refer back to your reference image as a guide when you're creating a look like this. Using a stipple motion, I'm placing a heavier coverage of the white cream into that new hairline that we've created. We want this to be a little bit fuller coverage because it will also cover up any darkness that shows through the ball cap of Jack's natural hairline. Another reason I'm using a stipple motion is because we want a really uneven finish to this white base. So it's important to kind of create expression to the face. We want a bit more of an angry appearance. So I've got Jack to scrunch his brows together and then obviously raising them in different directions. That way we're going to create different line work, different textures, and again this all adds to the expression of the face. The furrowing of the brows is really important because we want that to look like somebody who's constantly frustrated and angry and very expressive. For me, it's what makes the Joker character makeup very clever, because throughout the film he has expressions on his face even without having to move. Where the skin's coming through and the makeup's kind of broken up, you can see all the contours of his face. So the makeup in itself visually portrays a villain. So now I've got a base layer down, I'm going to go in with a little bit more of the cream product and start concentrating on areas that need a little bit more of a highlight to it, so they come forward a little bit more. So for example, the lines on the forehead, they need to be a little bit more intense. I'm also stippling extra coverage around the seams of the scar because we want this area to look puffier, so if we make that whiter it will stand out more. For around the eye area, I'm applying a black cream. What's great about this around the eyes is that as it warms up it starts to crease and just look really smudged and a bit grungy. You can use paint, and then as it's dried you can really stretch your face out, and what that will do is start to crack the paint. So again you'll get a similar effect but it won't be exactly the same. My preference is to use the cream. For the brow area, I'm using a very fluffy brush because the bristles will kind of splay out with the cream, which gives a really cool effect as it reaches up towards the forehead. If you use a brush that's too dense in bristles, then you'll get a heavier payoff. You want something that's quite light. The brush I'm using around the eyes has different length bristles, so as I pull the brush down, it will create little lines as though the makeup is sitting in all those natural crevices of the face. If there's any areas of the face that you don't want the black to migrate to, you can use alcohol activated paints because they will sit in place and they won't move. Coming down the eyes, I want it to look as though the makeup's dripped down and it's just left a stain. So I'm applying the alcohol activated paint there and then I'm dabbing it off with my finger. Then I'm taking a black eyeshadow and I'm pressing that over the grease paint on the eyes. This is going to add a little bit more of a dense colour. It will still crease like we want because the grease paint is underneath, but it will just add a little bit more of a deeper tone to the eyes. We want it to be quite black. You can pick up black grease paint and white grease paint at any kind of Asda store, Walmart, anywhere that sells kind of kids makeup, because most of the time they are grease paints. If you find the grease paint is very wishy-washy and it's not giving you a very good colour payoff because it is cheap, you can layer that with the black face paint and again you'll get a really good finish. If you'd like to see that technique in action, I will link it on screen for you now. The pumpkin makeup look that I did last year was a £1 Halloween set, and I layered both the cream and the black to really build up the intensity. To create the classic red Joker lips, I'm taking another cream based product. This one is a red shade, and I'm going to buff it onto the lips and then use my finger or a cotton bud if you prefer to work that over the seam so it gives you more of a diffused finish. Think Ronald McDonald after a heavy night out on the town. I'm also taking that up on either side of the scars, and I'm working that in the tiny little crevices of the scars as well, because that's what gives it the shape. This red is going to be your base colour before we go in with a deeper shade to create more depth. As you apply the colour, don't forget to go in with your finger to blur the lines and again diffuse the red, because we really do not want this to be a pristine look. Now don't worry if you go a little bit heavy with the red, because you can always go in and tap some white back over it, but if you use a light hand when doing so, you should be fine. You can't really go wrong because it's all about being kind of messy with this look. I'm now going to dirty up the forehead, and I'm placing some black in between the white lines on that forehead. Again, this just kind of adds a little bit more of a highlight and contour to them, making them look more like they're actual ridges in the skin rather than paintwork. And then I'm also doing the same around the nose just to intensify the kind of angry appearance that we've got going on. In between the black lines around the eyes, I'm adding a white highlight. This is going to make it look as though they're a little bit more like wrinkles rather than just smudges from the makeup. And again, the same to the very centre of those white lines on the forehead. This also makes it look like it's more dense paint that hasn't kind of moved off of the skin as well. Now I'm going in with a deeper red and applying this to the scars in the very centre, and this is going to create some depth, making it look deeper and like it's actually sunken. This red has a little bit more of a browny, purpley undertone to it. The scars are actually old, they're not actually fresh wounds, but the red obviously around the lips does give it more of a fresh feel, but the actual undertone of a scar is slightly more purple, so we're going for a mix of both. So I just finished off some tweaking, added a little bit more black to the eyes, and that completed my Joker look.
Why so serious? You want to know how I got these scars? Let's put a smile on that face.
A massive thank you to Jack for modelling for me. He made a brilliant Dark Knight Joker. If you missed my Suicide Squad Joker, I will link it on screen for you now. I did that look on Jack's twin brother Billy, so go and check that out. I've also listed a playlist for all my other Halloween looks if you are interested. Thanks for watching, and I will see you with another look soon.